I am Nathan, 33, a software engineer from Chicago who spent the last 5 years paying my parents' mortgage while my younger brother Marcus lounged at home playing victim. I loved my family enough to sacrifice my own financial future, only to discover they had been funneling my money to fund his failed schemes. Now they are about to lose everything and expect me to swoop in and save them again. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt torn between helping family and protecting yourself. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood on the northwest side of Chicago shaped much of who I am today. Our home was modest, a 3-bedroom brick bungalow with faded blue shutters and a small backyard where Dad would grill every Sunday during summer. Mom and Dad Robert and Diane purchased that house a year before I was born, and it was their pride and joy. I remember how Dad would spend weekends meticulously mowing the lawn or fixing whatever needed repair while Mom planted flowers along the walkway each spring. They worked incredibly hard to give us a stable life, but money was always tight. Dad worked as a manager at a local hardware store, putting in long hours, including weekends, while Mom balanced part-time jobs as a receptionist at a dental office and occasionally picking up shifts waitressing when bills piled up. They never completed college themselves, but made it clear that education was our ticket to a better life than theirs. They wanted us to achieve the American dream they had partially attained, but struggled to maintain. Marcus came along 3 years after me, and from the beginning there was a noticeable difference in how we were treated. While my parents had high expectations for me straight, as chores completed without reminders, respectful behavior at all times, Marcus seemed to operate under a different set of rules entirely. I vividly remember my 10th birthday when I received a second-hand bicycle that Dad had refurbished, which I was genuinely grateful for. 3 years later, when Marcus turned 10, he got a brand new mountain bike because he had thrown a fit in the store about wanting the display model. Mom explained, "Your brother is more sensitive than you. You were always such an easy child." This pattern repeated throughout our childhood, Marcus getting what he wanted through emotional outbursts, while I learned to suppress my desires to be the good son. By high school, our different paths were becoming more defined. I joined the computer club, maintained a 4.0 GPA, and worked weekends at the local grocery store bagging groceries. Meanwhile, Marcus bounced between friend groups, barely maintained a C average, and spent most of his time playing video games. When report cards came, my achievements were expected, while Marcus was praised for simply passing his classes. College further highlighted our diverging trajectories. I received a partial scholarship to the University of Illinois for computer science, but still needed to work throughout my college years to cover the remaining tuition and expenses. I worked 20 hours weekly at the university library, took summer internships at tech companies, and still graduated with $15,000 in student loans, but also with honors and job prospects. Marcus, on the other hand, half-heartedly enrolled in the local community college after high school, attending sporadically for 1 semester before dropping out. When I asked my parents about his plans, they always had ready excuses. "He is just finding himself right now," or "not everyone is academic like you," or my personal favorite, "Marcus is creative. He does not fit into traditional education systems." What they called creative, I saw as lazy. While I was pulling all-nighters to finish coding projects, Marcus was staying up until dawn, playing online games and sleeping until mid-afternoon. When I came home during breaks, he would be exactly where I had left him, on the couch, controller in hand, surrounded by empty energy drink cans. Despite my growing resentment, I still wanted to make my parents proud. After graduation, I landed a position at a tech startup in downtown Chicago. The salary was modest by industry standards, but felt like a fortune compared to my college jobs. I found a small 1-bedroom apartment about 40 minutes from my parents' house by train, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to establish independence. Those first couple of years post-college were liberating. I was paying down my student loans, building savings, and enjoying the fruits of my hard work. Every Sunday I would still go to my parents' house for dinner, and every Sunday I would find Marcus exactly as he had been during my college years, living at home rent-free with no job or plans. He would occasionally mention some business idea or online venture, but nothing ever materialized beyond talk. During these visits, I noticed concerning signs about my parents' financial situation. Bills were piling up on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator was making a concerning noise, but not worth replacing yet. The roof clearly needed repairs as water stains spread across the ceiling in the upstairs hallway. The first request for help came about 7 months after I started working. Mom called uncharacteristically timid, asking if I could loan them $800 for the electric bill they had fallen behind on. Just until Dad gets his bonus next month, she promised. I transferred the money immediately, and when I asked about Marcus contributing, Mom quickly changed the subject. That $800 was never repaid, and it marked the beginning of a pattern I did not yet recognize. Every few months there would be another emergency requiring my financial assistance, car repairs, property taxes, insurance premiums. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his pattern of starting and quickly abandoning minimum wage jobs, always with a dramatic story about why the workplace was toxic or how the manager had unreasonable expectations. I tried to discuss this with my parents several times. Why does Marcus not have to contribute to the household expenses, I would ask. The answers were always variations of the same theme. He is struggling with his confidence right now. Or he will figure things out in his own time. Or not everyone can find their path as easily as you did. Each of these conversations left me feeling both guilty for my success and angry at the unfairness. But I kept writing checks, telling myself it was temporary, that things would change. I was wrong. Everything changed dramatically 3 years after my graduation. It was a Tuesday evening in October when Mom called, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. Dad had collapsed at work and was being rushed to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I left my office, immediately canceling an important client meeting without explanation, and took a taxi straight to the emergency room. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room cast a sickly glow over my mother's face as she paced back and forth, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. Marcus sat slumped in a chair, headphones on, seemingly disconnected from the crisis unfolding around him. When I approached, Mom practically collapsed into my arms, sobbing about how Dad had been working too hard and worrying too much about the bills. After 4 excruciating hours, a doctor finally emerged to inform us that Dad had suffered a moderate heart attack. He would survive, but he would need surgery and significant lifestyle changes. When we were finally allowed to see him, I barely recognized the robust man who had taught me to throw a baseball and fix a leaky faucet. He looked small under the hospital sheets, tubes, and wires connecting him to machines that beeped steadily in the background. "I am sorry to worry you kids," he whispered, reaching for my hand with an IV punctured one of his own. "I will be back on my feet in no time." But he would not be back on his feet quickly. The doctor explained that Dad would need at least 2 months off work, followed by reduced hours for several months afterward. The hardware store where he had worked for 25 years offered minimal sick leave and mediocre health insurance with high deductibles. The financial implications were immediately clear to me, though my parents tried to downplay them. Meanwhile, Marcus was making the situation about himself. In the hospital cafeteria, while I was discussing Dad's medication schedule with Mom, Marcus had what he called a panic attack, hyperventilating and claiming he could not handle the stress of the situation. A nurse had to bring him water and a paper bag to breathe into while Mom comforted him, and I continued making notes about Dad's care requirements. The day before Dad was discharged, I met with the hospital's financial counselor. The numbers were staggering. The hospital stay alone would cost over $20,000 after insurance, not counting follow-up care, medications, and rehabilitation. When I asked about payment plans, the counselor gave me a sympathetic look and handed me a brochure about medical bankruptcy. That evening, I insisted on seeing my parents' overall financial situation. Mom reluctantly pulled out a shoebox full of bills, bank statements, and late notices. What I discovered shocked me. They had refinanced the house twice to cover previous medical expenses for Dad's high blood pressure and Mom's gallbladder surgery. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage. Credit card debt had ballooned to nearly $30,000 across 6 different cards, mostly from covering everyday expenses when paychecks fell short. I remember sitting at their kitchen table, the same table where I had done homework and celebrated birthdays, feeling like I could not breathe. The magnitude of their financial crisis was overwhelming. While I was building my career and dreaming of my own future, my parents had been drowning. That night, I had a difficult conversation with my girlfriend Jessica back at my apartment. She was compassionate but concerned. "It is not your responsibility to fix their financial problems," she said gently. "You have your own life to build." "They are my parents," I replied. "They sacrificed for me my whole life. How can I not help them? There is a difference between helping and enabling. Jessica warned a statement that would prove prophetic. And what about Marcus? Why is this falling entirely on you? I did not have a good answer for her then. Instead, I scheduled a meeting with my parents' mortgage lender, and then with a financial advisor recommended by a colleague. The mortgage company was willing to work with my parents on the missed payments, but they made it clear that further delinquency would result in foreclosure proceedings. The financial advisor painted an even grimmer picture than I had imagined. My parents were essentially insolvent with no retirement savings, a house underwater on its mortgage, and medical debt that would take years to repay. After several sleepless nights and long conversations with Jessica, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I created a plan to help my parents. I would pay their $2,000 monthly mortgage directly to the bank, help clear the medical bills, and establish a budget for them to follow to prevent further debt. My plan was met with tearful gratitude from my parents. Just until Dad is back on his feet, Mom assured me, we will pay you back every penny. Marcus, when informed of the arrangement, merely shrugged and said, "That is cool of you, bro," before returning to his video game. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement quickly became permanent. Dad did return to work after 3 months, but only part-time. His income nearly halved. Mom picked up extra shifts at the dental office, but it was nowhere near enough to cover their expenses. Meanwhile, I was transferring $2,000 monthly for the mortgage, plus varying amounts for utilities, property taxes, insurance, and unexpected expenses like when the water heater failed or when the car needed new tires. The financial strain on me was significant. I postponed my plan to buy my own condo, cut back on retirement contributions, and rarely took vacations. I worked overtime whenever possible, took on freelance coding projects on weekends, and tracked every dollar of my spending. Jessica and I stopped going out for dinners, replacing restaurant dates with home-cooked meals and free activities like walks along Lake Michigan. Throughout this period, Marcus continued his pattern of minimal contribution. He would occasionally get a job, retail clerk, food delivery driver, warehouse associate, but never kept any position longer than a few months. He always had excuses. The schedule was unfair. The manager had it out for him. The work environment was toxic, or his mental health was suffering. After each job loss, he would spend weeks or months recovering before half-heartedly applying for new positions. When I suggested he contribute even a token amount to the household expenses, my parents quickly shut down the conversation. "He is trying his best," Mom would insist. "Not everyone has your abilities and confidence," Dad would add. The subtext was clear. Marcus needed protection and understanding, while I was expected to be the strong, responsible one who could handle any burden. As the months turned into years, what had begun as an emergency intervention became my new normal. Every month I would pay the mortgage. Every few months there would be an additional urgent expense. My own financial goals, home ownership, travel, eventually starting my own family, receded further into the distance with each passing year. As my financial support of my parents became an entrenched part of my life, my career continued to progress. 2 years into paying their mortgage, I received a promotion to senior developer at my company, which came with increased responsibility, longer hours, and thankfully, a 20% salary increase. Instead of using this boost to improve my own situation, most of the additional income went toward covering more of my parents' expenses as inflation pushed up their utility bills, grocery costs, and property taxes. The added workload and constant financial pressure began taking a toll on my relationship with Jessica. What had started as occasional disagreements about my financial priorities grew into recurring arguments. "You are setting yourself on fire to keep your family warm," she said during one particularly heated discussion. "And they are not even trying to find their own matches. What am I supposed to do?" I shot back. "Let them lose their house. Let Dad skip his medications because they cannot afford them. Your brother could get a real job and contribute," she countered. "Your parents could downsize to something more affordable. There are options that do not involve you sacrificing your entire future." These arguments became more frequent until 3 years into my financial support arrangement, Jessica and I broke up. While there were other factors involved, the strain of my family obligations was the primary catalyst. The night she moved her things out of my apartment was one of the lowest points of my life. I sat alone among half-empty shelves and wondered if I had made the right choices. With my relationship over, I threw myself even more into work and supporting my parents. I moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment to reduce my expenses, extending my commute by 15 minutes each way, but saving $300 monthly in rent. I cut back further on personal spending, eating basic meals and forgoing new clothes or electronics. The constant stress began affecting my health. I developed insomnia, often lying awake until 3 in the morning worrying about money and my family. I started experiencing anxiety attacks before family dinners, knowing I would see evidence of my parents' continued financial mismanagement despite my help. I gained weight from stress eating and lost the exercise routine I had previously maintained. Meanwhile, Marcus's behavior grew increasingly manipulative. He developed an uncanny ability to claim depression or anxiety whenever the topic of jobs or contribution arose. "You have no idea what it is like to struggle with mental health," he would say, though he had never sought professional diagnosis or treatment. "Not everyone can just power through like you." He began cycling through various business ventures that required startup capital, which my parents inevitably provided from the money I was giving them. There was the dropshipping scheme that lasted 2 months. The podcast about gaming that recorded 3 episodes before he lost interest. The plan to sell custom t-shirts online that never progressed beyond a logo design, and the photography business that consisted of a $5,000 camera purchased on my parents' credit card that gathered dust after a week. I discovered these ventures not because my family was transparent about them, but through passing comments or seeing new equipment around the house during my visits. When I questioned these expenses, my parents became defensive. "We are just trying to support his entrepreneurial spirit," Dad would say. "He needs to find his passion," Mom would add. Marcus became adept at using my parents as emotional pawns against me. If I expressed frustration about their financial decisions or his lack of contribution, he would tell them I thought they were bad parents or that I resented helping them. This would result in hurt phone calls from Mom, with her tearfully asking if I was ashamed of them or if I wished I had different parents. The incident with the car exemplified the dysfunction perfectly. My parents' aging Honda needed regular maintenance that they often postponed due to costs. When Marcus needed to drive to a job interview for a position he would later claim was beneath his skills, he took the car despite Mom's reminder that the brakes had been making concerning noises. He ended up rear-ending another vehicle, causing several $1,000s in damage to both cars. Since my parents had reduced their insurance coverage to liability only as a cost-cutting measure, the repair costs fell entirely on them, which meant ultimately on me. When I arrived at their house the following weekend and learned about the accident, I asked Marcus directly why he had taken a car he knew was having brake issues. "How was I supposed to know the brakes would fail?" he said with a shrug. "Besides, if you had helped them maintain the car properly, this would not have happened." Somehow, in his narrative, the accident became my fault for not giving my parents enough money for regular car maintenance, rather than his responsibility for driving a vehicle he knew was unsafe. When I pointed this out, he stormed off to his room, and my parents chided me for being too hard on him when he was already feeling guilty. The tension between us reached its breaking point at Thanksgiving, that year the 4th year of my financial support. I had been working 60-hour weeks to complete a major project, was fighting a persistent cold, and arrived at my parents' house exhausted but determined to enjoy the holiday. The table looked festive with Mom's traditional turkey, and sides spread out on her best dishes. Dishes I had recently paid to replace after the dishwasher malfunctioned and flooded the kitchen. Marcus emerged from his room around 2 in the afternoon, just as we were about to eat, offering no help with preparations or table setting. Dinner began pleasantly enough with Dad carving the turkey and Mom proudly serving her homemade cranberry sauce. The conversation remained superficial until Dad mentioned that the property taxes had increased again and they might need a little extra help next month. Something in me snapped. "What about Marcus?" I asked, setting down my fork. "He lives here rent-free. Why cannot he help with the property taxes?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Marcus glared at me while shoving mashed potatoes into his mouth. "Your brother is between opportunities right now," Mom said carefully. "He has been between opportunities for nearly a decade," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "I am paying your mortgage, your medical bills, your car insurance, and now property taxes, while he contributes nothing. Not everyone can be perfect like you, Nathan. Marcus spat. Some of us have real struggles. Real struggles, I laughed without humor. You have never paid a bill in your life. You have never had to choose between fixing your car and paying rent. You have never had to cancel a vacation because your family needed money. That is enough. Dad interjected, his face flushed. Your brother is trying his best. His best? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. His best is sleeping until noon and playing video games all day. His best is starting businesses that fail within weeks because he has no work ethic. Meanwhile, I have put my entire life on hold for 4 years to keep this family afloat. We never asked you to put your life on hold, Mom said tearfully. You ask for money every month. I was nearly shouting now. What did you think that cost me? Do you think $2,000 a month grows on trees? Do you have any idea what I have sacrificed? The room fell silent again, except for Mom's quiet sniffling. Marcus wore a smug expression that suggested he knew he had won again. Dad looked torn between anger and shame. If you resent helping us so much, maybe you should stop, Marcus finally said. We will manage somehow. We always have. The audacity of that statement from the person who had never managed anything in his life was too much. I grabbed my coat and keys, mumbled something about needing air, and left. It was the first major holiday I had ever spent without my family, and I drove home in tears, equal parts furious and heartbroken. 6 months after the disastrous Thanksgiving, I met Sarah at an industry conference in downtown Chicago. I was giving a presentation on database optimization, and she asked the most insightful question during the Q&A. We ended up talking through the networking reception and exchanged numbers. By the end of the week, we had our first date at a small Italian restaurant near Millennium Park. Sarah was different from anyone I had dated before. As a UX designer for a healthcare company, she was creative but practical, passionate about her work but able to maintain boundaries. She came from a close-knit family in Michigan. Parents still happily married after 30 years, a sister who was her best friend, regular family gatherings that were supportive rather than draining. At first, I was hesitant to share the full extent of my family situation. I mentioned that I helped my parents financially, but downplayed the amounts and the frequency. I talked about my brother in vague terms, saying only that he had trouble finding his path. I was afraid that if Sarah knew the truth that I was essentially supporting 3 adults while living in a cramped apartment with secondhand furniture, she might see me differently. As our relationship deepened, however, keeping these secrets became increasingly difficult. 2 months into dating, Sarah suggested a weekend getaway to a bed and breakfast in Wisconsin. I had to decline, explaining that I had an unexpected expense that month. When she innocently asked what happened, I fumbled through an explanation about car repairs, not wanting to admit that my parents' air conditioning had failed during a heat wave, and I had paid the $2,000 replacement cost. Nathan, she said gently, taking my hand across the table of the coffee shop where we were having this conversation. I get the feeling there is something you are not telling me about your finances. Her kind, non-judgmental approach broke through my defenses, and everything came pouring out: the 5 years of supporting my parents, the tens of thousands of dollars spent my enabling of Marcus, the holidays, ruined by tension, the future, plans indefinitely postponed. I expected shock or perhaps pity. Instead, Sarah listened with genuine empathy and then asked thoughtful questions about how this situation made me feel and what I wanted for my own future. It sounds like you have been carrying this alone for a long time, she said. That is a heavy burden for anyone. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and understood. Sarah did not offer unsolicited advice or judge my choices. She simply acknowledged the complexity of the situation and assured me that I deserved happiness too. As our relationship grew stronger over the next few months, I began to see my family dynamics through Sarah's perspective, not as normal obligations, but as an unhealthy pattern that was harming everyone involved, including my parents and Marcus. With her subtle encouragement, I started to imagine what setting boundaries might look like. Then came the day that changed everything. I had decided to surprise my parents with a visit on a Saturday morning, planning to take them to brunch at their favorite diner. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed an official-looking envelope taped to the front door. My stomach dropped as I approached and saw the word foreclosure stamped in bold red letters across the top. Heart-pounding, I used my key to enter the house, calling out for my parents. They were sitting at the kitchen table. Mom's eyes red from crying, Dad staring blankly at a stack of papers. "What is going on?" I demanded, holding up the foreclosure notice. "I have been paying the mortgage every month. How is this possible?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mom would not meet my eyes. Dad cleared his throat several times before speaking. "We have been having some additional expenses," he finally said. "What expenses could possibly be more important than keeping your house?" I asked, my voice rising with each word. After more uncomfortable silence and evasive answers, the truth finally emerged through tearful confessions. For the past 8 months, my parents had been using the money I sent for the mortgage to fund Marcus's latest business, Opportunity. A cryptocurrency investment scheme he had convinced them would deliver huge returns. They had diverted my mortgage payments, believing they would be able to catch up once Marcus's investment paid off. Instead, Marcus had lost everything, nearly $30,000 of my money, in what turned out to be a barely disguised Ponzi scheme. The mortgage was now 4 months delinquent, and the bank had run out of patience. As this horrifying reality sank in, Marcus emerged from his bedroom summoned by the raised voices. Far from showing remorse, he immediately went on the offensive. "If you had just given us more to invest at the beginning, we would have hit the threshold for the premium returns," he said accusingly. "This is what happens when you do things halfway." I stared at him in disbelief. "You lost $30,000 of my money on a scam, and you are blaming me for not giving you more." "It was not a scam," he shouted. "You just do not understand cryptocurrency. If you had listened to me years ago when I first talked about Bitcoin, we would all be millionaires by now." My parents, rather than holding Marcus accountable, began making excuses for him. "He really believed in this investment," Mom said. "He was only trying to help the family." "We thought we could solve all our problems," Dad added. "Pay off the house, fix the roof, maybe even pay you back someday." The most devastating part was what came next. Instead of apologizing profusely, or showing any real understanding of the magnitude of their betrayal, my parents immediately pivoted to expecting me to fix the situation again. "We know you must be upset," Mom said, reaching for my hand, which I pulled away. "But we need to figure out what to do now. The bank says we need to pay $12,000 to stop the foreclosure process. And where exactly do you think that money will come from?" I asked, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Well," Dad said hesitantly, "you just got that bonus you mentioned." The bonus I had received, $15,000 for bringing in a major new client, was the first significant windfall of my career. I had finally, after 5 years of supporting my family, planned something for myself, a down payment on a small condo. I had excitedly shared this news with my parents just 2 weeks earlier. Marcus jumped in. "It is not like you need a fancy condo anyway. You are barely home with how much you work." That was the moment I finally saw with perfect clarity what I had been blind to for years. I was not helping my family. I was enabling a toxic dynamic that was destroying all of us. My parents would never learn financial responsibility if I kept bailing them out. Marcus would never grow up if he faced no consequences, and I would eventually break under the financial and emotional strain. Without another word, I walked out of the house, got into my car, and sat there for nearly 20 minutes, my hands shaking too badly to drive. Finally, I called Sarah and broke down, completely sobbing as I explained what had happened. She listened, offered calm support, and then said the words I needed to hear. "Come home to me. We will figure this out together." The week following the foreclosure revelation remains a blur in my memory. I called in sick to work for the first time in my career, unable to focus on code or client meetings while my world imploded. Sarah stayed with me at my apartment, managing practical matters like ensuring I ate and fielding the constant calls and texts from my parents that I could not bring myself to answer. Their messages ranged from tearful apologies to subtle guilt trips. "We understand if you need time," followed immediately by, "The bank called again about the foreclosure," or "We respect your feelings," paired with Dad is having chest pains from the stress. Marcus predictably vacillated between defensive accusations that I was abandoning the family and half-hearted apologies that always included justifications for his actions. Sarah suggested I might benefit from talking to a professional, and she gently researched therapists until I agreed to make an appointment. The therapist, Dr. Winters, listened to my story without judgment, and then asked a question that stopped me cold. What would you tell a friend who was in your situation? The answer came immediately. I would tell them they were being taken advantage of and needed to stop. Saying those words aloud felt both liberating and terrifying. Over several sessions, Dr. Winters helped me understand the codependent dynamics at play in my family. I learned about enabling behaviors, how my constant rescuing prevented my family from experiencing natural consequences that might motivate change. We explored why I had fallen into the role of family savior, partly from genuine love and concern, but also from deeply ingrained patterns established in childhood, where my worth was tied to being the responsible one who never caused problems. Your parents trained you to be the solution to their problems, Dr. Winters explained, and they trained Marcus to expect others to solve his. Neither of these roles is healthy for any of you. During this period of reflection, I forced myself to calculate exactly how much money I had given my family over the 5 years. The total shocked even me, over $150,000. That amount did not include countless smaller expenses. I had covered groceries during visits, replacing broken appliances, birthday and Christmas gifts far beyond my budget. It represented years of overtime, sacrificed vacations, delayed financial goals, and a substantial portion of my retirement savings that I had withdrawn early, incurring penalties. What made this revelation even more painful was realizing how little had changed despite this enormous investment. My parents were no closer to financial stability than when I started helping them. If anything, they had become more dependent and less capable of managing their finances. Marcus had regressed further into entitlement and irresponsibility. With Sarah's encouragement, I sought professional financial advice to understand my parents' situation objectively. The financial advisor reviewed the foreclosure documents and explained that the house could still be saved with the $12,000 reinstatement payment followed by regular mortgage payments. He also outlined alternatives. My parents could sell the house and use any equity to secure more affordable housing. They could explore reverse mortgage options given their age, or in the worst-case scenario, they could file for bankruptcy protection. The important thing to understand, he said kindly but firmly, is that none of these options actually requires your money. These are choices and consequences your parents can navigate themselves. I also consulted with a lawyer worried about any legal obligations I might have. He assured me that adult children in the United States have no legal responsibility to support their parents financially unless they have signed specific agreements to that effect, which I had not. Your moral and emotional obligations are between you and your conscience, he advised, but legally this is not your burden to bear. Both professionals strongly recommended that I stop enabling the situation, making it clear that my continued financial support was perpetuating rather than solving the problem. In quiet moments alone, I began journaling to process my thoughts and feelings. I wrote about childhood memories that now appeared in a different light. Dad praising me for giving Marcus my dessert when he complained about his own. Mom expecting me to let him win at games to avoid tantrums. Teachers commenting on how mature I was compared to other children my age, not recognizing that my maturity was actually hypervigilance and an unhealthy sense of responsibility for adult problems. I reflected on how these patterns had followed me into adulthood. My friend circle had shrunk over the years as I canceled plans to handle family emergencies, promising romantic relationships before Sarah had ended because of my inability to prioritize them over family demands. Career opportunities requiring travel or relocation had been declined because my family needs me here. My identity had become so entangled with being the family rescuer that I hardly knew who I was without that role. Sarah became my anchor during this tumultuous period of self-discovery. Unlike Jessica, who had grown frustrated with my inability to set boundaries, Sarah understood that I needed to reach my own conclusions at my own pace. She shared stories from her own family, not perfect, but fundamentally healthy, showing me what balanced family relationships could look like. My parents would never take money from me if it meant I could not pursue my own dreams, she explained one evening as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset. They would live in a studio apartment before they would ask me to sacrifice my future for their comfort. I also reconnected with friends who had witnessed my family dynamics over the years and had tried to warn me in ways I had not been ready to hear. My college roommate Ryan reminded me of how my parents had called me weekly asking for money even when I was working 3 jobs to pay tuition. My coworker Jennifer recalled how I had missed an important industry networking event because Marcus had called claiming to be stranded without gas money. We all saw it, Ryan told me over beers at our old college hangout, but you were not ready to see it yourself. The most profound realization came during a therapy session when Dr. Winters asked me to consider whether my help had actually improved anyone's life, including my own. Your parents never developed financial literacy because they did not have to, she pointed out. Marcus never developed work ethic or responsibility because there were no consequences for failing to do so. And you never developed the ability to prioritize your own well-being because you were too busy managing theirs. It was a devastating truth. My help had actually prevented growth and change. By constantly intervening, I had unwittingly contributed to a system that was hurting everyone involved. Real help, I was beginning to understand, sometimes meant stepping back and allowing natural consequences to occur. Armed with newfound clarity and the support of Sarah and Dr. Winters, I began preparing for what I knew would be an extremely difficult conversation with my family. This was not a decision I made lightly or in anger. It came after weeks of careful consideration, professional consultation, and deep personal reflection. Dr. Winters helped me develop a plan for the conversation, emphasizing the importance of being clear, compassionate, and consistent. Your family will likely respond with tactics that have worked in the past: guilt, anger, promises of change, she warned. You need to be prepared for that emotional storm without getting swept away by it. I worked with my financial advisor to create information packets about resources available to my parents, government assistance programs, credit counseling services, debt management options, and affordable housing alternatives. I researched job placement services and vocational training programs that might help Marcus find sustainable employment. Sarah helped me prepare emotionally role-playing potential scenarios so I could practice maintaining boundaries when faced with emotional manipulation. Remember, she would remind me after particularly difficult practice sessions, setting boundaries is not punishment. It is an act of love for them and for yourself. I wrote out what I wanted to say, revised it dozens of times, and practiced it until I could deliver it calmly, even when my heart was racing. I scheduled the conversation at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop with private seating areas on a Saturday morning, when none of us would be rushed by work obligations. I arrived early, securing a corner table and ordering herbal tea to calm my nerves. I had asked to meet with just my parents, wanting to address the core relationship first, but was not entirely surprised when they arrived with Marcus in tow. His presence changed the dynamic immediately. Instead of appearing contrite, my parents seemed bolstered by his support, sitting across from me with expressions that ranged from defensive to expectant. After brief awkward greetings, I took a deep breath and began the speech I had prepared. I love you all very much. I started maintaining eye contact despite my anxiety. And because I love you, I need to be honest about something that has been damaging our family for years. The financial arrangement we have had, where I support all of us, is not sustainable or healthy for anyone involved. I outlined the facts without accusation: 5 years of financial support totaling over $150,000, culminating in the diversion of mortgage payments that led to the foreclosure notice. I acknowledged my role in enabling this dynamic and expressed regret for not setting boundaries sooner. Going forward, I continued, my voice steady despite the tension crackling across the table. I will no longer be providing financial support. This includes the mortgage, utilities, car payments, or any other expenses. I am not doing this to punish anyone, but because continuing this pattern hurts all of us in different ways. I slid the folder of resources across the table. These are programs and services that can help with your financial situation, housing options, and employment opportunities. I am happy to help you navigate these resources, but I will not be providing money. The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt eternal. Then, predictably, Marcus was the first to react. "This is how you treat family." He exploded loud enough that nearby patrons turned to look. "After everything Mom and Dad have done for you, they gave you everything. And this is how you repay them." Mom began to cry quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Dad stared at the resource folder without opening it, his jaw clenched tightly. "We never meant to take advantage," Mom said between sniffles. "We just did not know what else to do." "I understand that," I replied, working to maintain composure. And I am not angry or blaming you. But continuing as we have been will not solve the underlying problems. Marcus scoffed. Easy for you to say from your privileged position. Not everyone can just get high-paying jobs like you. This is not about my job or your lack of one, I countered, refusing to be derailed. This is about creating a situation where everyone takes responsibility for their own choices and lives. Dad finally spoke, his voice uncharacteristically small. What about the foreclosure? Are you really going to let us lose our home? This was the question I had prepared for, most carefully knowing it would be their strongest emotional leverage. The foreclosure is a direct result of the decisions made to divert the mortgage money I was providing. I said gently but firmly. There are several options in that folder for addressing it, including selling the house before foreclosure completes, which would protect your credit rating and potentially provide funds for a smaller, more affordable place. So that is it, you are just abandoning us. Marcus's voice rose again. What kind of son does that? I am not abandoning you, I insisted. I am offering to help in ways that do not involve money. I will help Mom update her resume. I will drive Dad to financial counseling appointments. I will help you look for job training programs, Marcus. But I cannot and will not continue to fund a situation that keeps all of us stuck. The conversation deteriorated from there. Marcus stormed out after calling me several names I would rather not repeat. Mom cried harder while Dad vacillated between anger and bargaining. Perhaps I could just help with the foreclosure payment, or maybe continue the mortgage for 6 more months while they got on their feet. I held firm to my boundary, though it was one of the hardest things I had ever done. When it became clear that productive conversation was no longer possible, I stood to leave. I love you all, I said again. When you are ready to talk about solutions that do not involve my checkbook, I am here. Until then, I need some space to heal from everything that has happened. Mom reached for my hand as I turned to go. You cannot just cut us off completely, she pleaded. We are your family. I am not cutting you off, I clarified. I am changing the nature of our relationship to something healthier for everyone. I hope you can understand that someday. I walked out of the coffee shop with legs that felt like lead but a heart that was beginning to feel lighter. In the parking lot, I called Sarah, who had been waiting to hear how things went. It was awful, I admitted, but it is done. I am proud of you, she said simply. Come home when you are ready. Home. The word had such different meaning now. No longer my parents' house with its mortgage I paid, but the future I was finally allowing myself to build. My father called the next morning, his voice a mixture of desperation and calculation. Your mother has been crying all night, he began before launching into a revised proposal. Perhaps I could just pay half the mortgage or maybe loan them the foreclosure reinstatement fee. We are not asking for ongoing support, he assured me, just help with this one crisis. I took a deep breath and repeated my boundary. I cannot give you money, Dad, but I can help you explore other options if you are ready for that. He hung up without responding. It hurt terribly, but I also felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing my own well-being, without guilt or apology. The 3 months following my decision to stop financial support were among the most difficult of my life. My parents drastically reduced contact, calling only when they had a new financial crisis they hoped would change my mind. Marcus sent occasional angry texts accusing me of destroying the family. I maintained my boundary while also leaving the door open for a different kind of relationship, responding to every message with some version of I love you and am here to talk or help in non-financial ways whenever you are ready. I learned about developments through Linda, my mother's cousin, who had always been sympathetic to my situation. She reported that after the initial shock, my parents had begun taking steps I had never imagined possible. They met with a housing counselor who helped them list the house for sale before the foreclosure was finalized. They opened negotiations with creditors to settle or restructure their debts. Most surprisingly, they told Marcus he needed to either contribute financially to the household or find other living arrangements. Your dad has started looking into part-time work to supplement his income, Linda told me during one of our coffee meetups. And your mom is talking about taking a medical billing course. to increase her earning potential. These changes, while painful, confirmed what the professionals had told me: my family was capable of more than they had demonstrated while I was absorbing all consequences of their choices. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my own life. With Sarah's encouragement, I resumed house hunting, eventually finding a modest but charming 2-bedroom condo within my budget. After years of paying someone else's mortgage, signing the papers for my own home was an emotional moment. Sarah helped me furnish it with a mix of affordable new pieces and quality second-hand finds, creating a space that felt truly mine for the first time. My professional life improved as well. Without the constant drain of family emergencies, I had mental and emotional energy to invest in my career. I accepted a leadership role on an innovative project, mentored junior developers, and even began exploring the possibility of eventually starting my own consulting business. Most importantly, my relationship with Sarah deepened. 6 months after I purchased my condo on a weekend trip to Michigan to visit her family, I proposed. Her enthusiastic yes and the warm celebration with her parents and sister showed me what family could and should be: supportive without being suffocating, loving without conditions or scorekeeping. The gradual reconnection with my own family began unexpectedly. My parents sold their house and purchased a small, affordable 2-bedroom condo in a senior-friendly community. The sale had provided enough to clear their most pressing debts and make a modest down payment on their new place, with a mortgage payment less than half of their previous one. My mother called to share this news, her voice cautious but with an unfamiliar note of pride. "We wanted you to know that we have found a solution," she said. "We are not asking for anything. We just thought you should know." That conversation opened the door to tentative periodic communications. I learned that Marcus, faced with the reality that my parents could no longer support him, had finally maintained a job for more than 3 months, working at a warehouse that offered health benefits and steady hours. He had moved into a shared apartment with co-workers and was, according to my mother, adjusting to responsibility. The first time I visited my parents' new home, 8 months after our confrontation at the coffee shop, was both awkward and healing. Their condo was small but bright and manageable for them. They had furnished it with a mix of items from the old house and affordable new pieces. Mom had planted flowers on the small patio, just as she had along the walkway of their previous home. "It is not what we expected at this stage of life," Dad admitted as he showed me around. "But it is actually easier to maintain, and the community has activities we enjoy." Marcus was not present for that visit, which was probably for the best. Our reconciliation would take much longer and come in smaller steps, beginning with civil text exchanges, progressing to brief phone calls, and eventually, nearly a year after the confrontation, a cautious lunch meeting where we talked primarily about neutral topics, but without the previous hostility. The most meaningful change was not in our external circumstances, but in the dynamics between us. Without money as the primary connection, we were slowly, awkwardly learning to relate as adults with separate lives who chose to maintain relationships rather than remained entangled by financial dependence. The following Thanksgiving, our first holiday together since the confrontation, was a turning point. We gathered at my condo with Sarah, coordinating the meal, and everyone contributing dishes. There were moments of tension, particularly when Marcus made a pointed comment about my fancy new place, but also moments of genuine connection that had been absent during the years of financial entanglement. After dinner, my father pulled me aside while the others were helping with dishes. "I need to say something I should have said months ago," he began hesitantly. "You were right to do what you did. It was hard, and I was angry for a long time, but it forced changes that needed to happen. Your mother and I are actually happier now, living within our means." His acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. It was not a complete accounting for years of exploitation, but it was a significant step toward healing. Today, 2 years after I stopped financial support, my relationship with my family has found a new equilibrium. It is not perfect. There are still occasional attempts to seek financial help, though much smaller in scale and less frequent. Marcus still struggles with full independence, but has maintained steady employment and no longer blames everyone else for his challenges. Sarah and I are now married and expecting our first child, a development that has further shifted family dynamics in positive ways. My parents are excited about becoming grandparents, and even Marcus seems to be maturing in the face of this family expansion. The most profound lesson I have learned through this journey is that true support is not always financial. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. I now understand that my years of financial bailouts were not actually helping my family. They were postponing necessary growth and change. I have also learned about the importance of boundaries in all relationships. Love without boundaries is not really love at all. It is codependence that ultimately harms everyone involved. By reclaiming my financial autonomy, I was able to build a life aligned with my values while allowing my family members to develop capabilities they never knew they had. If you have been in a similar situation supporting family members beyond your means or comfort, I hope my story offers some perspective. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? What was your experience? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing that it is possible to love your family deeply while still protecting yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop being the solution to someone else's problems.